Good morning, students. Today we are at the last or the concluding part of the Age of Industrialization chapter. Now let's start very quickly to recap with what we had done last. There were few Indian industrialists like Dwarkanath Tagore, Jamshedji Tata, Sheth Hukumchand, etc. These industrialists were able to earn money through various trade. There were few merchants who traded with Burma. Some commercial group carried from one place to another, banking money and transferring funds between cities. Along the few Indian traders or merchants, there were mostly few European industries also, which were managed by and controlled by European managing agencies. The most important were Bird Higglers and Company, Andrew Yule and Jardine Skinners, etc. These agencies mobilized capital, set up joint stock companies and managed them. In many cases, the Indian financiers provided capital while the European agencies made all the investments and business decisions. Now we'll start. Where did the workers come from? In most districts, the workers came from the districts around and the areas around. Peasants and artisans who found no work in the village went to the industrial centers in search of work. For example, over 50% of the workers in Bombay cotton industries in 1911 came from neighboring districts of Ratnagiri. In the textile mills of Kanpur, workers came from the remote villages of that area. As the news of employment spread, workers travelled far and wide. Later, from United Provinces, they went to work in the mills of Bombay also. The next point is jobber. Getting job was always difficult when mills multiplied and the demand for work increased. Though the demand increased, people seeking jobs were always more in number than the jobs. Entries into mills were restricted. Industrialist appointed a jobber to get new recruits from his village. A jobber was an old and trusted worker of the industry or the factory. He got people from his village, ensured them jobs, helped them settle in the city, and provided them money in times of crisis. The jobber became a person of authority and power. He began demanding money and gifts for his favor and started controlling the life of workers. Now, for this, we can see the source E and source F. According to the source E, Vasant Pargar, who was once a mill worker in Bombay, said the workers would pay the jobbers money to get their sons work in the mill. The mill worker was closely associated with his village physically and emotionally. He would go home to cut the harvest and for sowing. The konkani would go home to cut the paddy and the khati, the sugarcane. It was accepted practice for the mills, for which the mills granted leave. And source F, it's mentioned, there's a detail about Hyde Bosley, a trade unionist of Bombay. In those days, the shifts were of 10 hours from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. Terrible working hours. My father worked for 35 years. He got the asthma-like disease and could not work anymore. And then he went back to village. So with these two details, we can find that the jobber was a person of authority and he was a person who could give them lot of demands of their needs. Now, according to the industrial growth, we also know that there were industries which were settling up. The most of the European industries They established tea and coffee plantations, they acquired land, and they invested in mining, indigo, and jute because they were primarily needed for exporting and not for sale in India. The Indian businessmen, on the other hand, they set up industries. They avoided competing with Manchester goods in the Indian markets. And the early cotton mills in India produced coarse cotton yarn rather than fine fabric because the superior variety was always taken away by the Britishers. Now, by the 20th decade, first decade, that is the 20th century, there was a series of changes which affect the pattern of industrialization. First is the Swadeshi movement gathered momentum. The nationalists mobilized people to boycott foreign goods. Industrial groups organized themselves to protect their collective interest, pressurizing the government to increase protection and grant concession. The exports of Indian yarns to China declined, and since produced from Chinese and Japanese mills, as the produce from Chinese and Japanese mills flooded the Chinese market. Industrialists in India began shifting from yarn to cloth production. Cotton piece goods production doubled between 1900 and 1912. After the First World War and during that time, there was a dramatic new situation. The British mills were busy with war production to meet the needs of the army. Manchester imports into India declined. The Indian mills had a vast home markets to supply, and as the war prolonged during the time of the First World War, Indian factories were called upon to supply war needs, that's of jute bags, cloth for army uniform, tents, leather boots, and mule saddles, and a host of other items. New factories were set up and old ones spanned multiple shifts. This was a time when the Indian workers got lot of jobs and lot of multiplication of industrial production happened and the industrial production boomed. Now this gave a new turnover. Manchester lost the markets in India and could never recapture its old position in the Indian market because there the Indian industries, they gathered. The cotton production of Britain crumbled and collapsed, and the export of cotton cloth from Britain fell dramatically. Within the colonies, local industrialists gradually consolidated their positions, substituting foreign manufacturers and capturing the home markets. Now we will see how the small-scale industries predominate. Now, though industries were growing steadily, but only a small segment of economy was under industrialization. Now, when we see in the rest of the country, small-scale production continued to predominate. Only a part of the factory force, labor force, was registered under factories, that is 5% by 1911 and 10% by 1931. The rest were only worked in small workshops and household units, often located in small by-lanes invisible to the passer-bys. Now, how does this happen? We will see that though cheap machine-made threads were there, but they were very less. We found that the weavers survived. In the 20th century, handloom cloth production expanded steadily. This was because the technological changes happened. Handicraft people adopted new technology, and by the second decade of the 20th century, weavers started using fly shuttle. Now, what is fly shuttle? It's a mechanical device used for weaving, moved by the means of ropes and pulleys. It places the horizontal thread into vertical thread collar wrap. The invention of fly shuttle made it possible for weavers to operate large loom and weave wide piece of cloth. By 1941, over 35% of handlooms in India were fitted with fly shuttle in regions like Travancore, Madras, Mysore, Cochin, Bengal. The proportion was 70 to 80% there, and many small innovations helped weavers improve their productivity and compete with the mill sectors. So we can see here that the mills were having lot of improvements, and most of the weavers who produced coarse cloth were started weaving finer variety of cloth also. Though because the coarser cloth had a fluctuating demand when there were bad harvests, the poor people did not have money to buy the cloth, but the richer one and the finer varieties always had a market. Well, we can see the demand for finer varieties bought by the well-to-do was always stable. The rich could buy even when their poor starved. Famines did not affect the sale of Banarasi or Baluchari sarees. Mills could not imitate the specialized weaves. Saris with woven borders or with famous lungis and handkerchiefs of Madras could not be easily displaced by the mill production. The weavers and other craft people continued to expand production throughout the 20th century, and though they did not necessarily prosper, they lived hard lives and worked long hours and included all women and children from their families who had to work at various stages of production, but they continued to predominate the whole of the 20th century. Now we will come to the last part where how did the market of goods that were there during that time. The British manufacturers attempted to take over the Indian market, and how the Indian weavers and craftsmen and traders and industrialists resisted colonial controls, demanded tariff protection, created their own spaces, and tried to extend the market for their produce. When new products were produced, people had to be persuaded to buy them. They have to feel like using the products. There was one way which new consumers were created through advertisements. They tried to shape the minds of the people and created new needs. Today we see there's the world of advertisements around us. They appear in newspaper, magazines, hoardings, street walls, television screens. But at that time, from the very beginning of the industrial age, advertisements, though very less, very less, they played a part in expanding the market for products and in shaping new consumer culture. When Manchester industrialists began selling cloth in India, they put labels on the cloth bundles. The labels was needed to make the place of manufacture and the name of the company familiar to the buyer. The label was also to be a mark of quality. When buyers saw "Made in Manchester" written in bold on the label, they were expected to feel confident about buying the cloth. Labels not only carried words and text, they also carried images and were often beautifully illustrated. When we look at these old labels, we have some idea. Images of Indian gods and goddesses regularly appeared on these labels. It was as if the association with gods gave divine approval to the goods being sold. The imprinted images of Krishna or Saraswati was also intended to make the manufacture from the foreign land appear somewhat familiar to the Indian people. By the late 19th century, manufacturers were printing calendars to popularize their products. Unlike newspapers and magazines, calendars were used even by people who could not read. They were hung in tea shops and in poor people's homes just as much as office and middle class apartments. Those who hung the calendars had to see the advertisements day after day throughout the year. In these calendars, once again, we see figures of gods being used to sell new products. Like the images of gods, figures of important personages, emperors, and nawabs adorn the advertisements and calendars. The messages often seem to say, if you respect the royal figure, then respect this product. When the product was being sold by the king or produced under royal command, its quality could not be questioned. When Indian manufacturers and advertised nationalist messages was clear and loud that if you care for the nation, there was also some Swadeshi messages like that if you care for the nation, then buy product that Indians produce. advertisements became a vehicle of the nationalist message of Swadeshi also at the late hour of the year. Thank you, students. Here we come to an end of this chapter, Age of Industrialization. I hope with the help of this video, you will be able to understand the chapter and go through the different features in the textbook also. Thank you.